My name is Sarah. I was 28 when my mother smiled at me during a final wedding fitting and did something I still don't have words for. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind that almost feels neutral, cloudy, cool, no drama in the sky. The appointment was booked at a boutique in St. Paul I'd chosen because it felt peaceful, unpretentious. The kind of place where silk wasn't treated like royalty and women could try things on without apology. I just finished my final alterations, a satin column gown with pearl buttons down the spine. Minimal, graceful. I stood on the platform in front of the mirror, half turning to examine the hem. My mom sat off to the side, legs crossed, holding a lavender travel mug and pretending to scroll her phone. Ethan had said he'd meet me there. It was supposed to be the last wedding errand we did together before the big day, a soft send-off to the chaos of planning. We were only 8 days away from the ceremony at Willow Grace Chapel, a renovated train station turned venue, complete with stained glass windows and weathered benches repurposed for pews. But now he was running late. My calls went to voicemail. I tried not to spiral. "He's probably caught in traffic," Mom said without looking up. "Yeah," I replied. "Maybe his morning meeting ran long." She sipped her tea. I still think it's fast." I turned toward her. "What is?" "This engagement. I mean, you two dated what? Less than a year?" "We've known each other for longer than that, but not deeply. It just seems sudden. You've been through a lot. Maybe he hasn't seen all sides yet." I tried to brush it off as her usual protective critique. She'd said similar things before. After my second hospital stay, when Ethan sent flowers every day. After my hair began growing back, when he drove me to my first gallery opening post-treatment. But this time it had a sharper edge. My phone buzzed, a group text from my bridesmaids. "Ethan not there yet? LOL." I didn't respond. Mom stood and walked toward the pedestal, her eyes swept down the back of my dress. She said softly, "sometimes people get scared when they realize how much responsibility marriage is, especially when health is delicate." I froze. "Is that what you think this is? A burden?" I asked. "No, I think you're strong, always have been." She adjusted a button. "But not everyone wants to sign up for unpredictability." I didn't respond. The seamstress stepped back in and gave a cheery, "Almost ready for the final pin?" I nodded, but inside something had already shifted. Ethan never showed. I left the shop with the hem tagged for final steaming and the dress bagged in clear plastic. My mother offered to drive me home, but I declined. I took the long route back on foot, walking past bookstore windows and closed cafes, pretending I was just cooling off. The wind picked up as I reached the bus stop. My reflection in the glass looked tired, washed out. I adjusted my scarf and sat on the bench. My phone remained silent. I texted Ethan once. Nothing, no missed calls, no explanations. Just a strange silence where something warm had been. I returned to the clinic 2 days later. It was a low-sky Thursday with sleet in the air, the kind of gray that seeps into your collar and spine. I pulled the scarf tight around my neck as I stepped off the bus and headed toward the iron and glass entrance of Meridian Oncology. The front garden was still brown from frost, but someone had planted early crocuses. They looked brave, naive. Inside, the heat hit sharp. A nurse behind the plexiglass smiled without recognition. "I'm here for Dr. Kendall, Sarah Monroe, 10:15. She frowned, tapped something out, then blinked. "You're not on the board today." I forced a small smile. "I rescheduled last week. He said it was fine." More typing, more blinking. "Hold on, let me check with the back." I stepped aside. The waiting room was louder than usual. 2 toddlers were building towers out of tissue boxes while a woman across from me loudly whispered in her phone about insurance codes. But I wasn't listening. I was staring at the whiteboard near the nurse station. There used to be a patient chart there, a list of ongoing cases marked with initials and weeks in cycle. Mine had always been on it, SM. 12 weeks, then reevaluation, but now the space where my code had lived was blank. The magnets rearranged. My phone buzzed. A message from my bridal stylist asking about veil options. I didn't answer. The nurse came back. "We've got an open consult room while we figure this out. You can sit there." I nodded and followed her down the long hallway. The walls were covered in framed posters, landscapes, affirmations, a watercolor of birds migrating across a blue sky. I used to stare at that one during infusions. The consult room was cool, dim. I sat on the vinyl bench and waited and waited. 20 minutes passed, then 30. When I finally knocked and opened the door, The hallway was dark. Lights off, the wing was empty. I turned toward the front again, but a familiar voice stopped me. Sarah? I turned. It was Kim, one of the techs. We'd shared quiet jokes during my second round. She always wore maroon scrubs and sneakers that squeaked. Hey, I said. Bit of confusion today. Her face shifted. You're not on Dr. Kendall's list anymore? That's what they're saying. Kim looked down, hesitated, then spoke quietly. Your file was moved last week. No one said why. Moved where? She shook her head. Not sure. Something about reassignments. I figured maybe you transferred? I didn't. Nobody had asked. Outside, sleet scratched against the windows. My stomach twisted, not from fear, but recognition. A pattern was forming. Tiny shifts, silent edits, small disappearances. I walked back toward the waiting room in a fog. The toddlers were gone. A different nurse was on rotation now. No one looked up. At the exit, I stopped. Behind the front desk was a corkboard of patient highlights, photos, testimonials, thank yous. Mine used to be there. Me in a headscarf smiling with Dr. Kendall after my third cycle. It was gone. I stared for a long moment. Then I stepped outside. The cold didn't bother me this time. I didn't head for the bus. I walked, past the clinic, past the school where volunteers were raking the lawn, past the bakery I used to stop in after treatments. I didn't go in. I didn't want croissants. I wanted answers. And I had a name in my head I hadn't spoken in months. I didn't sleep that night, not because of nightmares. Those require rest. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, tracking the rhythm of its slow, indifferent circles. Something in me had shifted at the clinic. Not just confusion, something colder, older. A memory I hadn't known how to name until now. I needed someone who'd known me before the rearrangements began. So the next morning, I took the light rail across town to a place I hadn't visited in nearly 3 months. The third floor of the Allendale building, with its chipped gray elevator and the hallway that smelled like old printer paper and green tea. Dr. Lanier's office. I'd started seeing her during radiation, mostly because my mother insisted I process properly. But Dr. Lanier had never pushed. Her sessions were gentle, grounded, more silence than theory. At least they had been. I wasn't sure what I was looking for now. Maybe memory, maybe proof I hadn't imagined it all. She met me at the door herself. No receptionist. Same calm smile, same thick sweater draped over the back of her chair. Sarah, it's been a while. I didn't have an appointment, I said. You don't need one. The room was unchanged. Pale green walls, 2 armchairs angled toward the window, books on grief, resilience, fatigue. I sat. My palms itched. She waited. I was at the clinic yesterday, I said. She nodded slightly, still watching me. I wasn't on the schedule. My records were moved. My name's gone from the patient board. They said I was reassigned. Dr. Lanier didn't speak. Her expression was thoughtful, not surprised. I didn't ask to be reassigned, I added. No one told me anything. A pause, then she asked, softly, Do you think someone intervened? The word landed like static. I looked at her. I think someone's been editing my life, quietly, precisely. She leaned back. When did that feeling start? I'm not sure, but I think it's been building. Missing messages, changed plans. People who used to check in suddenly don't. I told her about the wedding fitting, about Ethan's silence, about the photo missing from the clinic wall. She listened the way she always had, attentively, calmly, then said, That kind of displacement isn't random. It's relational. What do you mean? If it's happening in multiple areas of your life, family, care, partnership, then someone is shaping a narrative, and you're being written out. Written out, my throat tightened. I'm not asking if I'm paranoid, I said. I'm asking if this has happened before. Dr. Lanier's gaze didn't waver. You've described exclusion before, but you always gave your family the benefit of the doubt. Because I needed them, I said. Because I was sick. And now? I stood slowly. The air felt thicker. Now I'm watching, closely. I thanked her and left. Outside, the city was loud. Sirens, bus brakes, vendors arguing across a food truck line. But it all sounded far away. My steps were fast, but my mind moved faster. If she was right, if someone was shaping what others saw of me, then it wasn't just carelessness. It was deliberate, coordinated. I crossed into the bus terminal. Sat on the bench beside a mother with 2 restless kids and a duffel bag full of snacks. I wasn't part of the photo wall. I wasn't part of the calendar. I wasn't part of my own narrative. But I still remembered every piece of what had been mine. And I was done being quiet. The rehearsal was scheduled for 4 p.m. at Willow Grace Chapel. I arrived early. The building used to be a train depot, ornate arches, vaulted ceilings, weathered pews that still smelled faintly of coal and damp wood. It was the one place I truly wanted for the ceremony, not for the aesthetics, but for the symbolism. A place meant for departures, repurposed for union. Funny how quickly symbols can sour. I entered through the side door where vendors usually brought in florals. Two assistants were arranging folding chairs for the evening run-through. A string quartet tuned quietly in the far left aisle. Someone had laid out white rose petals along the bridal path. Too early. That wasn't the plan. My mother stood near the altar, clipboard in hand, flanked by the new wedding coordinator. Claire, someone she hired 2 weeks ago to help relieve your stress, sweetie. I hadn't seen the updated schedule yet. As I stepped inside, a few heads turned. One of the junior ushers gave me a tight-lipped smile and nodded toward the back. I think they're checking placement with Family Rose. Family Rose. My spot used to be on the left side, front row, center aisle. I should have been standing at the altar. I took a breath and walked up. Claire looked up, startled. "Oh, we weren't sure you were coming today." "Why wouldn't I?" she faltered. "Just some confusion. I think your mom mentioned something about you needing rest." I turned to my mother. She didn't meet my eyes. "It's been a long month, Sarah. We didn't want to overwhelm you." "I wasn't consulted." Mom raised her chin. "I told them you'd observe today, not participate." "Observe what? My own wedding ceremony?" She smiled tightly. "You've done so much already. Let this be the part where you sit back and enjoy." I looked past her. The flower girl was rehearsing with a miniature basket. The officiant was talking quietly with the groomsmen. "Where's Ethan?" I asked. "Running late," she said. "He texted earlier." I didn't ask to see it. I turned to Claire. "Show me the program." She hesitated. I stepped closer. "Now." She handed me a stapled printout. The layout was different than last week. Some names had shifted, some weren't there at all. My name? Third page, bottom honorary mention, no role, no vows, no walk. I flipped back to the front. The quote beneath the title caught my eye. "Sometimes the people who stand beside us the longest are not the ones who walk us home." Anonymous. I looked up. "You let her rewrite the ceremony." "She's your mother," Claire murmured. "No, she's the editor." I folded the program and slid it into my coat. Then I turned to the aisle, my aisle, and walked it alone. Down to the altar, past the reserved seats, past the flower petals I hadn't approved, and I stood where I was meant to. People stared. Claire whispered something to my mother. I didn't flinch. "I'm not a guest," I said aloud, though not loud enough to echo. "And I'm not an accessory." A beat of silence, then I turned, walked slowly back, stopped beside the entrance. "I'll return for the real thing," I said. "But you won't choreograph me out again?" My mother's face was unreadable. Claire said nothing. I walked out into the cold. The doors hissed shut behind me. The train station was nearly empty, save for a few commuters dragging their heels through the gusty corridor. I chose it on purpose. An in-between place. Nowhere to hide, nowhere to perform. Just motion and steel and too much air. I hadn't been back here since the diagnosis. Back then, I'd stood near the same ticket counter in a scarf and oversized coat, pretending I wasn't about to fall apart. Back then, trains had meant escape, possibility. Now they just looked like exits I hadn't taken. The platform's benches were cold. I sat near the edge, facing the tracks, my hands balled in my coat sleeves. The rehearsal had left my nerves humming with the kind of anger that doesn't rise all at once, but coils, slow and vengeful, like steam under glass. They'd cut me out of the walk, the words, the very shape of the ceremony. I'd walked that aisle anyway, but it hadn't been enough. It still felt like they were narrating a version of my life that erased the chapters they didn't like. I reached into my coat pocket and unfolded the program again. That quote stared back at me like a dare. I didn't know who had chosen it, but I knew who had allowed it. A voice cut through the air behind me. "Didn't expect to see you here." I turned. Josh. My brother. He looked thinner than I remembered. Sharper around the jaw, more shadows under the eyes. His hoodie bore the logo of the sports rehab center he'd spent all winter at after the surgery that had dominated every family conversation for months. "I was just heading north," I said, flat. "Really?" He glanced at the empty tracks. "You don't have a bag." "Maybe I'm not going far." He nodded, like he accepted that. Josh sat on the bench beside me, not too close, not casual either. I heard the rehearsal was intense, he said after a long pause. You heard right, he exhaled slowly. They keep saying you're tired, that you're overwhelmed, that maybe you're not ready for everything. I looked at him. Do I look overwhelmed to you? No, you look angry. Good, another silence. He shifted. Mom said you've been missing your appointments. I haven't. She said the clinic couldn't find your records. They couldn't, because they were moved. Josh looked up, something flickering behind his eyes. You think she... I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I don't always agree with her, he said. That's generous, I replied. You benefited from her choices. He flinched. I didn't care. You know, he said quietly, when I was in recovery, she told me not to worry about you. Said you were handling things, said you didn't want to fuss. I didn't want to disappear, I said. There's a difference. Another gust swept across the platform. Josh tapped his fingers against his knee, nervous. She loves you, he offered. She loves what I represent, not who I am. He didn't argue. We both stared down the track. No train yet? Finally, he stood. I hope you don't run. I'm not running, I said, rising too. I'm preparing. For what? I looked at him squarely, for clarity. Then I walked toward the stairs, not to board, but to watch. I wanted to see every arrival, every departure, every face that used to look through me. The restaurant was one of those new mid-century fusion places with matte black walls, gold light fixtures, and overpriced appetizers that looked like sculptures. My mother chose it, of course. Neutral ground, she said, but there was nothing neutral about it. We hadn't had a family dinner since before my diagnosis, not one. Not when I lost my hair, not during radiation, not after the wedding got postponed for scheduling reasons. So, when I got the group text, dinner at Jules, Sunday, 6 p.m., everyone will be there. I already knew something was wrong. I arrived 5 minutes early. Josh was already at the table, playing with the corner of a cloth napkin. My dad sat across from him, stone-faced, reading the wine list like it was scripture. My mother stood to the side, talking to the host. I didn't greet anyone. I just sat. Glad you could make it, Dad said without looking up. Not like I had a choice, I replied. My mother gave a small breath laugh, then gestured to the waiter. Let's just eat and talk. Like normal. Nothing about this was normal. The table was set for 5. I noticed that immediately. 1 seat too many. Who else is joining? I asked. No one, my mother said quickly. Too quickly. Josh shifted uncomfortably. The waiter brought water and menus we didn't need. None of us touched them. My dad cleared his throat. We thought this would be a good chance to align. Align what? I said. Our understanding, my mom answered, about where things stand. Where what stands? The wedding, your treatment, expectations. I blinked. Expectations? She smiled like she was hosting a brunch. We've all had to adapt lately. It's been hard for everyone. I sat back. Hard for everyone, I repeated. Right, not just the person who had to fight for basic visibility. Josh murmured. Sarah. No, I snapped. They planned this. They called this meeting because I made a scene at the chapel. Because I walked the aisle they cut me from. My mother set her fork down. We're trying to help you refocus, she said, before things escalate. I stared at her. Before what escalates? She folded her hands. There's talk, concerns about your stability, about whether this wedding is really in your best interest right now. I froze. The extra chair, the evasions, the word stability. You talked to Ethan, I said. No one responded. You talked to him, I repeated, without me. It wasn't like that, my dad said. Then what was it? My voice rose. A warning, a heads up that his fiancé was emotionally compromised? It was a conversation, my mother said sharply, and frankly, he deserved to know where things stood. I laughed, once, sharp. You mean you told him everything, on your terms, behind my back? We were worried, she said. You were controlling the narrative, I fired, like you always do. Josh looked down. The waiter hovered nearby, sensing something volatile. You didn't plan this dinner to reconnect? I said. You planned it to neutralize me. No one answered. The 5th chair stayed empty. 3 days after the dinner, I returned to the chapel. It was closed to the public, but I'd made arrangements weeks ago to drop off ceremony materials, a backup plan if I couldn't carry them the day of. The woman at the front desk, Paula, didn't remember me at first, then she tilted her head. "You're Monroe, right? Ethan's?" Her voice trailed off. I nodded. "Yes, I need access to the bridal vault." It wasn't a literal vault, just a locked cedar cabinet in the prep room where couples stored programs, unity candles, backup shoes, vow books. I had left mine there before the final fitting. Paula hesitated. "Normally, we need a dual sign-in, both names." "I signed the form solo," I said calmly. "2 months ago. Check the sheet." She checked. I was right. She buzzed me in. The prep room was colder than I remembered. Stone floors, faint lavender scent, soft glow lighting meant to soothe anxious brides. My name was still on the locker. Monroe, 14 April. I opened the door. Half of it was empty. The candles were gone. So were the guest scrolls I'd ordered from a calligrapher in St. Paul. My vow book, white leather, hand-stitched, wasn't in its sleeve. What remained? 2 programs, folded, smudged, and a single blue envelope with my name on it, not my handwriting. I stood frozen for a moment, then lifted it. Inside, a typed note on plain stationery, no signature. "Things are shifting. You need to stay flexible. Please trust that this is for your own protection." That was it. I folded the note back and returned it to the envelope, then slid it into my coat pocket. My hands were shaking, but I kept my posture straight. Paula was waiting outside when I returned. "Everything in order?" she asked. "Mostly," I said. She looked uneasy. "There was some confusion last week. Someone else asked to adjust the cabinet, said they were consolidating materials, wedding updates." I turned to her. "Who?" She glanced down. "They didn't leave a name, just said they were family. We don't usually get involved unless there's a conflict." "There is now," I said. She didn't argue. I left the chapel and crossed the lot to my car. But I didn't drive. I just sat in the front seat, the envelope still in my hands, the note like acid against my fingers. "You need to stay flexible." Translation, we're rearranging your life again. Silently, cleanly. But this time, I wasn't just catching up. I was documenting. They had entered the only space I thought was still mine. They had edited my vows, not metaphorically, literally. And I couldn't shake the sense that they weren't done. This wasn't panic anymore, this was strategy. I wasn't losing my place in the story. I was beginning to write it back. I chose the location myself, a corner cafe 2 blocks from the courthouse, noisy enough to keep the conversation public, quiet enough to keep it deliberate. My mother was already seated when I arrived. She'd picked the booth farthest from the windows. Of course. I slid in across from her. No hug, no smile, just 2 black coffees between us and a silence we both knew how to fill too easily. "So," she said, folding her hands, "you've been making waves." I ignored the bait. "I visited the chapel. I heard. They let someone into my vault." She sipped her coffee, unbothered. That cabinet wasn't locked properly. Maybe a staff error. The candles were gone. The programs were changed. My vow book was missing. She said nothing. I leaned forward. "You had them removed." That's a strong accusation. "I found a note." Her eyes flickered, just once, but not in surprise, in calculation. "Typed," I added. "No signature, but it used phrases you've used before. Stay flexible. For your protection." My mother gave a practiced, weary smile, the kind she used at bridal showers when someone else got too emotional. "You've been under stress, Sarah. There's no shame in acknowledging it." "I'm not confused." "You're reconstructing events to fit your fear." I narrowed my eyes. "That's rich, coming from the architect." She looked past me, scanning the counter like she was waiting for her second latte. "I know what you did," I said. "I know you've been controlling the narrative behind my back, talking to Ethan, talking to the chapel, talking to my team." Her tone turned clinical. "You needed help organizing. You were overwhelmed." "You mean inconvenient?" She blinked, slowly. "Sarah, I've spent my entire life making sure things didn't fall apart around you. I've protected your image, your options, your chances. You erased my choices. I refined them." The words chilled. "You changed the programs, you moved my clinic file, you reshaped the wedding to reflect what you thought was safe." "I made sure you wouldn't embarrass yourself," she said. There it was, clear, uncut. I stared at her. You're not worried about me. You're worried about perception. No, she said. I'm worried about consequences. You've become unpredictable. And this marriage, it's not something you just deserve. It's something you maintain. Like a reputation, I said. She didn't answer. I sat back, let the weight of it settle. All my life, she'd spoken in scripts. Words engineered to sound like concern, but built like cages. I used to think I couldn't decode her because I wasn't sharp enough. Now I knew the truth. The confusion was the design. I'm not asking for permission anymore, I said. She reached for her purse. Then I guess you don't need this meeting. I never did. I stood. She stayed seated. One thing I knew now, she only fought for things she thought she could still control, and I was walking out of reach. Ethan chose a casual spot, open patio, strung lights, no walls to trap tension. It should have been romantic. It was anything but. He was already seated when I arrived, elbows on the table, staring down into a half-empty glass of soda. When he saw me, he stood, tried to smile. I didn't. I sat. He hesitated, then sat too. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said quietly. You stopped answering my calls. He exhaled through his nose. I didn't know what to say. Start with the truth. Silence hung between us. Around us, couples laughed, forks clinked, some toddlers shrieked at a balloon. The world moved on. Ethan finally spoke. Your mom called me 2 weeks ago. I didn't blink. She said you were having trouble with the planning, that you were under strain, that you'd had episodes. My stomach tightened. She said you were pulling away, canceling appointments, ignoring your doctors, and that she was worried deeply about your ability to commit to something this big. I stared at him. She asked me to give you space, told me that if I pushed too hard, I might cause a relapse. I said nothing. She said you'd been disappearing. And you believed her, I said softly. He looked down. I didn't want to, but she was calm, measured. She had details. She's always calm when she's rearranging things. He ran a hand through his hair. I kept waiting for you to call. I thought maybe if you really needed me, you would. I did, I said. I needed you to see through it. He looked pained, and instead I waited. And instead, I repeated, you left the fitting, you went silent. You let her direct the narrative. I thought I was protecting you. No, you were protecting yourself from the discomfort of not knowing who to believe. That landed hard. He looked away. I never lied to you, I said. I never ghosted appointments. I never pulled away. She built that version of me because it was easier to manage than the real one. He shook his head, more at himself than me. I didn't even question it. That's what makes it work, I whispered. When the betrayal doesn't feel like cruelty, it feels like caution. Silence again. Then he looked up. Is it too late to undo what I believed? I didn't answer, because the truth wasn't about undoing anymore. It was about what had already been undone. Trust, presence, protection. He reached across the table. I didn't move. Let me fix this, he said. You can't fix something you didn't defend. He pulled his hand back slowly. The lights above us flickered with the wind. I need to think, he said. I nodded, then I stood. While you're thinking, I'll be remembering everything they hoped I'd forget. And I walked away, not quickly, but with the deliberate steps of someone who no longer wanted to be explained. I went back to the campus clinic on a Thursday morning when I knew their archive assistant wouldn't be there. They didn't know I still had clearance. Most people thought records meant computers, but old systems don't delete, they relocate. Which is how I found myself in the auxiliary records room, a cold beige sub-basement beneath the nursing wing. Half lit, filled with steel drawers that groaned when you pulled too hard. I'd brought gloves, not because I was afraid of dirt, because I knew fingerprints would matter later. I went straight to the section marked Outpatient Oncology, Transfers and Terminations. Third drawer, center file, color-coded. My name, Monroe Sarah. I flipped through the folders. The first few pages were mine. Blood panels, radiation logs, notes from Dr. Carlisle. Then something changed, a document dated 6 months ago, a request for treatment reassignment. Reason, patient requested reduced engagement due to emotional instability. Signed, not me, not my doctor, but someone on the family contact list. I scanned the signature, not legible, but I knew the handwriting. Slanted, clipped, precise. My mother's. She'd filed it through a liaison. She'd marked me unstable on paper. and no one had ever asked me to confirm. I kept going. There were call logs, a nurse's note, mother requested all non-essential communication routed. Another, patient declined presence at family consult meeting, proceeded per maternal direction. I hadn't declined anything because I hadn't been invited. My entire treatment arc had been manipulated from access to narrative. And because the clinic assumed she was acting on my behalf, they'd let her dictate how I was seen. This was more than sabotage. This was medical erasure. I photocopied everything, every page. Then I placed them into my own folder, labeled it myself, tucked it into my coat. On my way out, I stopped at the receptionist's desk. I need to update my family permissions list, I said. The woman blinked. Of course. Who would you like to remove? I gave her one name. She typed quickly. All right. That should propagate across departments within the hour. I nodded. I'll also need a summary of my active file, unedited, full history, not the revised one. Her brows raised. That may take a few days. That's fine, I said. I'll wait as long as it takes. As I left the building, the air outside hit different. For the first time in months, I wasn't defending my version of events, I was confirming them, and I had paper to prove it. On the shuttle back to the city, I held the envelope close to my chest like it was oxygen. The rows of seats were empty. The driver hummed something off-key. I didn't care, because somewhere in that thick packet was my voice. Buried, ignored, rewritten, now returned. Saturday, 48 hours before the ceremony. I arrived at Willow Grace before anyone else. The front gate was still chained, but I had the secondary vendor access code. Buried in the paperwork they assumed I'd forgotten. I entered quietly, without announcement, like a ghost who'd grown tired of haunting and decided to govern instead. Inside, the chapel was quiet. Not silent. Quiet in the way a stage is just before curtain. Wires coiled, lights humming, wood creaking as it settles. The arch where we were supposed to exchange vows was still wrapped in unfinished ivy. Someone had moved the unity table. Again. I pulled it back center. Then I walked the aisle, but not the way I had last time. Angry, isolated, reactive. This time I walked like it belonged to me. Because it did. By the time the others arrived, ushers, florists, sound tech, I had already spoken to the staff. I delivered new programs, the real ones, my versions, fresh printed and sealed. The original order had never been canceled. It had just been rerouted, intentionally. Claire, the coordinator, walked in mid-checklist and did a double take. You're early. I'm in charge, I said. She blinked. We have a sequence, which has been updated. I handed her a clipboard. She scanned it, frowned, then looked at me. Did you authorize? Yes, I filed the changes this morning, and I've notified the officiant. Her lips parted, searching for a foothold she no longer had. I left her standing there and walked to the front row. Mom arrived 10 minutes later. Perfect hair, calm step, confident, until she saw the new programs. She picked one up, flipped it open. Her mouth went tight. My quote's missing, she said. It was never yours to begin with, I replied. This is disrespectful. What you did to my file, to my relationship, to my autonomy, I said, that was disrespectful. She held the program like it was evidence. You're being theatrical. I smiled. No, you're just not directing the act anymore. She tried to hand the paper back. I didn't take it. Ethan arrived last. He looked uncertain, his jacket unevenly buttoned, his eyes scanning the room like someone trying to read a language they used to speak. I walked to him, held out the new order of ceremony. Read it, I said. He did. When he reached the final page, his eyes lifted. These are your words. Yeah. You're walking? Yes. He nodded. A small gesture, but enough. I turned back toward the altar. The florist gave a subtle thumbs up. The quartet started tuning. My mother stood in the aisle, gripping the old program like a banner she no longer controlled. You won't make it through this whole thing, she said softly. I met her gaze. You already didn't? Then I stepped past her, toward the aisle, toward the arch, toward the moment they thought they'd scripted for me, and which I now claimed unrevised. The sun hit the stained glass just right. Color spilled down the pews like something divine had bled across the floor. The chapel filled slowly, guests whispering, adjusting corsages, flipping through programs they thought were typical until they noticed the final page. There was no mention of her, no quote, no mother of the bride dedication. Just a line. Words should never outlive truth. The quartet began to play. I stood behind the door, veil lifted. My heart didn't pound. It pulsed, strong, deliberate. I wasn't nervous. I was finished waiting. Claire appeared. Everyone seated. Ready? Yes. The doors opened, and I walked down the aisle, alone. Not abandoned, not incomplete, intentional. My father didn't extend his hand. He stayed seated. My mother's eyes followed every step like a hawk tracing weakness. She wore white. Of course she did, but it was my walk, and I filled it. The air thickened as I approached the arch. Ethan stood waiting, face unreadable, but he didn't fidget, he didn't flinch. That was enough. The officiant greeted us with quiet warmth, then nodded to me. Sarah has prepared her vows, he said. A murmur rolled through the pews. I took the paper from my pocket. My hands were steady. I was told not to write these, I began, that they might make me emotional, that they might be too much. Pause. I was told a lot of things about love, about illness, about trust. I was told what resilience should look like and who was allowed to speak when it didn't. Silence. My love for you, I said to Ethan, was never a performance. But other people tried to direct it, quietly, constantly, with the kind of voice that never shouts but always rearranges. My mother didn't blink. I stood in hospital lobbies alone while others gave updates. I watched files disappear, permissions shift, phone calls rerouted, until even my voice felt like a liability. Ethan lowered his head. But I'm still here, and these are my words, my vows, not theirs. I unfolded the page. I vow to speak with clarity even when it shakes. I vow to protect the truth, especially when it's inconvenient. I vow to walk through every room like I belong in it, because I do. A quiet inhale passed through the guests. I vowed to never again confuse silence with peace. I folded the paper, placed it down. The officiant turned to Ethan. He said nothing. Then, I need a moment. He stepped back. Whispers erupted. Chairs shifted. Someone dropped a program. I stayed still, unmoved, because I had already said the part that mattered. The room could change shape, but my voice would not. The courtyard outside the chapel was filled with wind. Petals from the early arrangements were scattering down the stone path. The guest book table stood unattended, the pens tipped sideways. No one remembered to sign after the ceremony. People filed out in clusters. Some avoided my eyes. Others gave me quick, tight smiles. The kind you offer at funerals when you don't know whose grief you're standing near. I didn't chase them. I waited by the edge of the reflecting pool. Ethan hadn't returned. The chairs in the chapel were still warm, but the ones around the reception tent stayed mostly empty. A few distant relatives hovered near the hors d'oeuvres, nibbling awkwardly, whispering louder than they realized. I watched them choose. Not sides, narratives. Some left quickly, murmuring things like, "She's so brave," or "I just wish it had gone smoother." Translation, we didn't expect her to finish that sentence. My Aunt Carol approached, hands tight on her clutch. "Sarah," she said, "that was..." I waited. She settled on, "intense." I nodded. Truth usually is. Her eyes darted behind me. "Your mother's in the car." I figured. "She says she won't stay if you're going to keep performing." "I'm not." "What do you call this?" "Testimony." She blinked, then walked off. Josh came later. Slower. He looked pale, out of place in his too bright tie. He didn't hug me. Just stood beside me and stared at the shallow water. "I didn't know," he said. "You didn't ask." "I thought you were overreacting." "I know." He scratched his neck. "What are you going to do now?" I looked across the lawn where the tables stood perfectly set, all untouched. "Leave with the people who stayed." He nodded once, then reached into his coat pocket, handed me something wrapped in tissue. My vow book, the real one. It was in Mom's glove compartment. I took it, slow. He added, "She said you'd thank her one day." "I just did," I said quietly, "by surviving." He didn't argue. I turned toward the rental car where the driver stood silently by the door. My suitcase was already loaded, not by family, by the florist's assistant, the only person who noticed I had no one in my corner, until now. From behind, I heard one last voice, soft, steady. "Sarah?" Ethan, I turned. His tie was gone, his boutonniere wilted. His eyes were tired in a way I didn't recognize, not from work or fear, but from recognizing he'd waited too long. "I heard your vows," he said. "I know." He stepped closer. "You left space for me." "I did. I don't deserve it." I didn't disagree, but I didn't leave. Do you want to walk? He asked. No, I said. I already did. Then I opened the car door and got in. The waiting room was colder than I remembered. Neutral art, soothing tones, chairs built for posture, not comfort. I hadn't returned to this clinic since the first round of radiation. Back then, I'd been advised to process in private. So I'd sat across from Dr. Langston and edited myself for 60 minutes at a time. This time, I requested a recorder. She hesitated, then agreed. I didn't come to be soothed, I came to be heard. She gestured toward the couch, but I chose the upright chair, set the recorder between us. Whenever you're ready, she said. I pressed the red button and spoke. My name is Sarah Monroe. I was 28 when my mother intervened in my medical treatment without consent. I was 28 when she altered public perception of my condition, reframed it as instability, and redirected support away from me under the guise of management. Langston didn't interrupt. I continued. I was also 28 when the person I was supposed to marry believed that version of me more than the one who'd stood by him through recovery, loss, and the planning of a life. The hum of the HVAC unit filled the pause. I am not here to indict, I said. I am here to identify, to name the absences that were called help, the restrictions dressed as protection, the silence labeled peace. I leaned forward. When someone edits your life while you're still living it, it doesn't erase you. It replicates you, a false version, one that's easier to manage, to pity, to discard when inconvenient. My hand hovered over the recorder. I survived what they didn't see as survivable. Not just the illness, the exile. Langston finally spoke. And what do you want now? I didn't blink. To never be rewritten again. I stopped the recording. Silence lingered like smoke. She nodded once. And if they ask for a copy? They won't, I said. They only collect evidence when they're writing the script, not when it belongs to someone else. I stood, no tears, no unraveling, no hunger for apology. I wasn't undone, I was unbound. It was quiet in the medical library, not dead quiet, the kind filled with fear or tension, but the kind that hums with chosen silence, the kind that means something sacred is being read nearby. I stepped through the back hallway, past the journal indexes, toward the patient narrative shelf. They didn't know I'd been here before. Months ago, back when the diagnoses were still raw and I'd searched the archives hoping to find someone like me, someone who'd written what I hadn't yet learned how to say. I hadn't found her then, but now I brought her. In my bag, one bound copy, my words, not a metaphor, a physical object, 72 pages, labeled Unedited Recovery, the voice that remained. Not published, not reviewed, just placed. I reached the empty slot between navigating illness with dignity and silent strength. Letters from chemo, and slid mine in. No fanfare, no plaque, just space, finely filled. Behind me, a staff librarian adjusted a display case. She glanced up. New donation? Personal record, I said. Approved? I smiled. Documented? She didn't press. I left before she could ask my name. At the door, I looked back. The spine of my book caught the light. Simple, clean, the voice that remained. I stepped out into the brightness where no ceremony waited, no music played. Just light on pavement and the sound of someone turning a page inside. For once, it didn't matter who read it. What mattered was that it could be read at all.